Welcome to Soundtrack Your Life, a podcast about soundtracks, music, and movies. Each episode features a guest and focuses on a specific soundtrack and the personal stories connected to it. Now here's your host, Ryan Pack.
Can we make sure we talk about the soundtrack first? Because I know where this conversation is going to go. And I know that we're going to be doing like a scene by scene analysis of some stuff, I'm sure.
I promise not too many rabbit holes, Ryan, that the soundtrack is worthy of on its own. The soundtrack is stacked. The soundtrack has a super group.
Yeah. That's two, actually.
I mean, this is just so much to unpack just with the soundtrack alone. So I will try really hard not to talk about Ewan MacGregor's naked body covered in oil.
Yeah. Actually, I think you've shown a lot of restraint over the past few months, suggesting we do Velvet Goldmine without like screaming after and being like, Ewan's naked, full frontal nudity.
Full frontal! Yeah, guys, I think I've shown a ton of restraint. Thank you for acknowledging that.
So welcome to Soundtrack Your Life. I'm Ryan Pack, and this is a podcast where I talk to someone, or in this case, two someones, about a soundtrack that they have a personal connection to. Brandice Wilson and Nicole Barlow are back today, and we're going to talk about the 1998 Todd Haynes film Velvet Goldmine. Nicole picked today's film, but before we dive into the film, let's make some connections to some of the other soundtracks that we've talked about on this podcast. So I'm going to geek out a little bit about soundtrack supervisor people. So in our Life Aquatic episode, Nicole, we talked about Randall Poster.
Randall!
And he's kind of Wes Anderson's go-to soundtrack supervisor guy. And he is also associated with this film. And the person who did the score for the film is Carter Burwell, who was a soundtrack supervisor for Airheads and like Wayne's World 2. So you have a lot of people who are very well versed in rock and roll.
Very well versed in rock and roll. I mean, this is a quintessential rock and roll film. This has been described as a love letter to glam rock, and I think it is exactly that. It is this spectacular of just glitter and glam and fabulousness, and it really like goes deep into that genre. There is no cutting corners with this film. Todd Haynes did the era right.
So Todd Haynes is maybe not the most well-known director, but he's known for knowing his music.
Yep.
So he's probably best known for this film and also I'm Not There, which is his Bob Dylan film.
Yep. Todd Haynes is he's an interesting one, right? He kind of rose to notoriety because I don't know if you guys know this, but Todd Haynes' first film was this thing called The Karen Carpenter Story, and it's made completely with Barbie dolls, so no actors, it's just Barbie. And initially, like, because I guess Todd Haynes is the guy that asked for like forgiveness and not permission, he just went ahead and made it, assuming that he would get the rights. And then the Carpenter family saw it, and they were like, "No, we don't like any of this, and you can't use it." So, no. And the same thing happened with Velvet Goldmine, right? Where Bowie was initially in and he was going to offer some of his music to the film. And then he found out that Todd Haynes had it in his mind to make so much of it kind of a biopic about Bowie based on some unauthorized biographies. And he was like, no, yoink, just kidding. You're not using my music. So that's Todd Haynes in a nutshell.
Not only that, but apparently he was like so angry that he was like threatening to sue. So I guess there were like a few rewrites here and there to make it a little bit less Bowie-esque. Although if you look at any sort of like list of references of all the ways that it wraps around Bowie's life, I can't imagine what was possibly taken out because it's like pretty thorough. There's so many references in like bands' names and people's names. And then I'm glad you talked about the Barbie thing because that scene with Slade and Kurt, like making out and about to like have sex with the Barbie scene. I was just like, what the hell? Because I had no idea about his earlier film that was like all Barbies until I did some digging afterward. And I'm like, I mean, I guess that makes more sense, but like also what the hell?
I mean, Todd Haynes he goes there at so many of these scenes. If you've never seen the film, come completely out of the blue and just smack you across the face with the shock value, which is very glam rock to me. So that feels appropriate. But yeah, as Ryan said, like the people involved in this are pretty rock and roll, and it is so like I don't know who they missed in terms of we weren't able to use Bowie. But we're gonna use everybody else. Everything else that's cool from that era, we're gonna swoop it.
Yeah, and technically, I think on one of the songs, Bowie's backup vocals are actually on there because he produced like, one of the songs. So
Lou Reed, right?
Yeah, and so he's like technically in the film, even though he was like, I will not be in this film. So they got him in there anyway, on technicality.
On a sneaky technicality. Yeah,
Yep.
It's very sneaky. A lot of sneaky workarounds. And like you said, Brandice, I have no idea what they sucked out of this to make it less Bowie, because our main character, who is played by Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, Brian Slade, who is kind of you could say he's an amalgam of like maybe Bowie and Joe Bryant, but he's mostly Bowie.
Mm-hmm.
And that is pretty obvious. They want him to like embody this very like early Bowie, like ethereal thing that he does. Like Bowie's early career arc is kind of all the first part of this film. They just use different artists from the era to represent that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really like, what did you take out? You changed his name to not being David Bowie. Like,
yeah, what did you take out? I think we did Moulin Rouge, right? And so we talked a little bit about Ewan MacGregor singing.
Yes.
Jonathan Rhys-Meyers and Ewan MacGregor both sing in this film. I'm so curious what you guys think of their singing ability in this film.
I was surprised. Like, obviously, I knew that like Ewan MacGregor's done musicals, and so I'm like, oh, okay, cool. He's probably gonna like do his own singing in this. No big deal. But then Jonathan Rhys-Meyers. First of all, I was like, does this dude not age? Like, when was this movie made? Because it looks like it was made yesterday, first of all. Second of all, also, I was surprised that he was singing. I had no idea that he could, and I thought he did a great job. At first, I was like, that's not really him. And then I looked it up, and I was like, oh, no, that's really him.
Well, sometimes it isn't him.
Well, sometimes it isn't. No, but like sometimes it was. And I didn't know that he sang at all.
Yeah, I think he does an admirable job, because I imagine he probably had to take some vocal coaching for this movie. The parts of the songs that he's not singing or that are overdubbed by, drum roll, Tom York.
Tom York doing a Brian Ferry impression.
Tom York doing his best Brian Ferry, which is kind of the most like 1998 perfect thing.
It's kind of amazing that Todd Haynes and Randall Poster were like, well, we can't afford all this music, so let's get Tom York and Johnny Greenwood to form a cover band, and that'll be much cheaper.
Much cheaper. I always think that too. I'm always like, well, they really didn't cut any corners in terms of like, and maybe they had the budget for Bowie if they were going to license all of Bowie's music, so they just said like, F it. We're going to put all of this into like Roxy Music and Brian Eno. Oh, and by the way, we're also going to bring Tom York and Johnny Greenwood and all the members of Placebo, just for fun.
Yeah, I mean, David Bowie wouldn't be cheap. So if they already had all that budget earmarked, why not? Gotta spend it somehow.
This is how you know Brandice and I work in advertising. So we're always like, what did that music licensing cost?
I've read that, for a lot of soundtracks that if they can't afford a song, they'll just have a band cover it because it's a lot cheaper.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, but in this case, that's like not the cheapest way to cover other music. So
get the most famous people we can find to cover these famous songs.
Exactly. Like that's not how you save money. So that's just really funny.
Not a prize performer, directors of the world, not a prize performer. But, it's really effective. The songs that they have Tom York and, his crew of Merry Misfits doing as this fake band called Venus in Furs are great. Like those covers of Roxy Music that they do are really awesome. In my opinion, they fit really well. They're very like kind of done very dramatically. So I feel like if you can consider this movie kind of like half a musical, which it sort of is, sort of half a musical in a way. It has a lot of musical interludes. I think it really starts like it helps carry the story without having to be, without taking it out of the idea that like, oh, that's not Jonathan Rhys-Meyers' voice. It's not the same. It worked somehow.
Yeah, no, I thought it was super seamless and all the music, the way that it fits together. If anything, I'd say it's more than a musical. I'd say it's like a music video, actually. Like a whole thing felt like a very elaborate half like art performance, half like music video for like the soundtrack. Like if the soundtrack was the main piece and then the video just happened to accompany it. I mean, I know it's supposed to be like the glam rock version of Citizen Kane, but to me, like the music was very front and center the whole time, but not in a bad way.
Yeah, well, like performance is so central to it because there's so many both, kind of live and music video-esque performances that intercut the whole movie, right? So when Ewan MacGregor sings, Ewan MacGregor does a couple of Stooges covers. He does Give Me Danger, and then he does TVI, which again, like Ewan MacGregor can sing, but I don't think that I imagined up until I saw this that Ewan MacGregor can like sing like Iggy Pop. Like it's a really great embodiment of Iggy Pop, which is not an easy task. Like there's only one Iggy Pop.
Yeah, but also you're biased, so I don't know that your opinion counts.
Well, no, that's why I'm asking you guys. That's why you're here. Nicole, come down off the ledge, put the Kool-Aid in.
Ewan MacGregor can do no wrong in your eyes.
I mean, he can't.
So we're going to steer back to the music. How was I familiar with Rocky Horror Picture Show, but not with this up to this point in my life? Because this to me was like definitely like a huge hit. Like there were no misses here.
Right. I think it's such an underrated cult classic, especially if you love music from this era. If you love music from this era and also have been or are currently an English major, this is kind of like this movie is for you, right? So this is like this movie tailor made for me, basically.
That especially, like you said, it's a love letter to glam rock, but I feel like it's glam rock's love letter to Oscar Wilde. Like obviously there are a lot of Oscar Wilde quotes in there, references, a character supposedly being Oscar Wilde, et cetera, but like it is so like Oscar Wilde, and I know that it's supposed to be a send up to Bowie, but it just felt like Bowie was just like a more modern take that like a current audience could stomach, but it was really like a send up to Oscar Wilde himself. Like it was insane how much it was just like revering him, and I absolutely love that. So yeah, great for English majors.
So great for English majors out there. Watch this movie. Enjoy this film.
So I saw this movie when we were, talking about doing this episode. So, for the last 25 years, I'd only really known about the soundtrack. And it seems like a perfect companion piece to Hedwig. I know Hedwig came later, but it seems like these two films kind of have a lot of similarities.
Yeah. They're very much bookends in my mind. They're like a similar time period of release, right? If I'm not totally mistaken.
Yeah, like just a couple of years apart.
Yeah, so they're sort of like contemporaries. They have a lot of the same vibe.
Yeah, and how they tell their stories is kind of similar as well.
Right. Yeah, no, totally, because they both kind of focus on these themes of like identity, wrapped around this idea of like musical performance and presentation. So they have a lot of similarities. I also love Hedwig. Hedwig is amazing. And yeah, like the both of the song choices for this movie they're so great. Like again, they didn't get Bowie, but it also really takes you there, and it feels so of its time and place. Like it has everything. Like, what does it not have? It's got Satellite of Love by Lou Reed. It's got like all this early Roxy music. That scene that's set to Roxy Music's Virginia Plain, where it's kind of like a makeover scene, right? Where they're all doing like that photo shoot. I think that's the first time I had ever heard that song when I saw it like way back in the day. And I was like, what the fuck is this? I'm mind blown. I need all of the Roxy music like in my life now.
I almost wonder if they had gotten David Bowie's music, if it would have taken something away from it. Not because like David Bowie's music wouldn't be relevant, obviously, and not because it's not amazing, but I can't say like too much on the nose because it's so incredibly on the nose, as we said, but just if that would have been too meta, or if that would have made it like a little bit less like we're referencing him, but now we're using his music. So now it's just like this weird thing of like, it is David Bowie without it being David Bowie. I don't know. Like, I'm wondering if it actually like that accidental, like serendipitous thing of not being able to use his music actually kind of contributed to it in some way.
It kind of makes it more awesome, right? Because it's a much steeper hill to climb, but at the same time, the movie as it stands now, because it doesn't have any Bowie music, is more of this kind of like Fantasia. It's this like wonderful like ambrosia amalgam of all things glam, and I think that gives it like a certain uniqueness and magic that it wouldn't have had otherwise, because it would have been a lot more straightforward, and you would have been saying to yourself, like, is that Bowie? Like, does he look like Bowie? Does he perform like Bowie? And I think it liberates your characters when they don't have to be an exact person.
Yeah, so it's like you got to do a biopic without being constrained by it being a biopic. And also just because David Bowie is such a performer, then it's almost like, well, if you're doing a biopic, why isn't David Bowie doing it himself?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, especially at this time, because he would have been like, very much alive and very much like making music and performing, and in his kind of like, industrial, I'm hanging out with Trent Reznor phase. So
yeah.
like,
I'm afraid of Americans, so it would have been totally relevant.
right.
It allows you to turn off like your music fan fact checker when you're watching this movie.
Yeah.
Yes, Ryan. Yes, that's exactly what it does. It's like, because if you love music and if you love, if you love certain artists, obviously you're going to be comparing. You're going to be asking like, okay, is the hair right? Is the costume correct? Did it happen at this concert? Like, so this takes it into a fantasy land that is actually, it's really pleasant to get lost in. And it gives you more of a feeling instead of, having you kind of like tick those boxes, which is super cool. And it's the same thing for the Kurt Wylde character, which Ewan MacGregor plays, right? Where he's Iggy Pop, but he's also like a little bit of Lou Reed. He's like a little bit of Kurt Cobain, like a dash of Kurt Cobain for good measure. Just because, fuck it, why not?
Yeah. It should have been any other name. Like, just don't call him Kurt, because that's all I could think the whole time.
Yeah.
So he also gets a super group to play with or to sing with.
Yep.
So we have Venus and Furs for the David Bowie or glam songs. And then for the Stooges song, you have a band that has, I believe Mike Watt is playing bass. I think one of the guys from the Stooges, Ron Ashton, is playing in it. And you have Thurston Moore and Steve Shelley from Sonic Youth.
Yep.
Mark Arm from Mudhoney. So you've got a pretty good super group there too. Maybe not as famous as Tom York and Johnny Greenwood and Andy McKay from Roxy Music, but they equipped Ewan MacGregor's band with some pretty good ringers as well.
Absolutely. No, that band is equally as stacked, and I think qualifies as a super group. Like, those are enormous names. The Wylde Ratttz with 3 T's.
I want to know what it feels like to be Jonathan Rhys-Meyers or like Ewan MacGregor, who are, like, were big stars like at the time, but not like insanely huge, maybe as much as today. And to be playing like the frontman of these, like, like with actual rock stars like behind you.
Mm-hmm.
Already when you're being an actor, you have to step into someone's life and you have to have like the confidence to do that. But to do it with like the actual people that you're making this music about behind you as like,
well, I mean,
background.
Yeah.
Like, how does that feel? Like, how like nerve-wracking is that?
The sheer like confidence factor of being able to be a front man when that is not your forte and that's not necessarily like your background is, I guess, a testament to the quality of the casting in this film, that they were able to find actors that could slip so well into those sorts of roles, and you believe it, and it's not like, okay, that's an actor pretending to be a musician. Like, I think for the most part, you pretty much buy it. You guys know this is coming, and I'm sorry that I have to dissect this scene on the podcast, but there's a scene where the Wylde Ratttz, where the Iggy Pop Stooges moment happens at this like giant UK music festival. And, obviously like the Stooges were known for being like very shocking and having onstage antics, and Iggy is like, whatever, carving up his chest. Like, that's what they were known for, like, at the time, right? It's just being sort of unhinged. So I read that in that scene where Ewan is performing on the festival stage and he's supposed to like, whatever, open Jonathan Rhys-Meyers' eyes, like, oh my God, this music is crazy. He was supposed to like whatever dance around, like moon the audience. He's supposed to moon the audience, and that's it. And apparently Ewan MacGregor decided, nope, I'm just gonna take my pants off completely. I'm gonna take my pants off. I'm gonna douse myself in this oil. I'm gonna cover myself in glitter. Like, this movie kept that in.
And you forgot the detail and then turn around and face the audience.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So there is some full frontal in this film. So for those of you out there that are wondering, I don't know, I'm not really convinced by Velvet Goldmine, I don't think I need to watch this film, you might want to know that fact.
Again, Nicole's only a little bit biased, only slightly. That, is not the main selling point of this film to her at all. Not at all.
I'm amazed at how composed you are about talking about this.
I hope
you
the
practice.
audience can hear me like leaping out of my seat. I'm just like, I'm literally sitting here like, oh my God, I've only been waiting 20 years for somebody to ask me about Velvet Goldmine. Now I finally have a platform for all of this like ranting and raving about how freaking amazing it is and how you get
your camera's off because your eyes are like popped out of your head right now.
Yeah, my camera's off, so you guys don't have to see me like gesticulating wildly my beer because I'm thinking about this movie and how like outstanding it is on every level. But yeah, I mean, if for no other reason, watch this one scene. Completely crazy, unhinged, you have no idea what kind of ride it's going to take you on movie, because it's great. And he does such an admirable job of embodying this Iggy Pop character, which again, like, how do you even begin to do that, right? Like, because he's just such a known figure, and I think he kind of brings his own thing to it. I think, look at me, like, and now I'm talking about it like it's super high art. Like, guys, we're back to just the art of filmmaking.
I mean, I think it was to like a degree. Like, it has every single genre of film like wrapped up in one thing. It has like sci-fi with The Pin. It has horror with like the creepy whispering children. It has camp. It has noir with Christian Bale's like first monologue is like super Citizen Kane noir.
Yeah.
It has like literally everything, which is on brand for like the whole fashion and era of the time. So I think even the way the film was made itself is a send up to like glam rock, is a send up to the fashion, which by the way got nominated for an Oscar for best costume design, which I am not mad about that because the fashion in this film was like 100% on point.
I love the performance of Babies on Fire in the film. So it's another Roxy Music song, or I think it's just an Eno song, right? Sorry, I think it's an Eno song. So you have Jonathan Rhys-Meyers and Kurt Wylde on stage together. Kurt Wylde's playing guitar in the band, and Ewan MacGregor has to basically be Iggy Pop playing a Johnny Greenwood solo on stage, so he has to mimic that he's playing this Johnny Greenwood, bonkers guitar lick,
right.
And then he has to do the Iggy Pop thing, and then he has to, basically do something super shocking with Jonathan Rhys-Meyers on stage because he's on stage with, quote, Bowie, unquote. So there's a lot going on in that performance, and I was really, I was really impressed watching it.
Yeah, there's that on screen, there's that performance moment, right, where like you get like the infamous like Bowie, Ronson, like Electric BJ on stage thing, which like whatever shocked the world. And then I think the other element of it is that it's like happening like over an orgy. So there's a lot going on. Like it's a pretty heavy use of that song.
No, I thought that performance was like really good. I thought all the performances were like, they felt very authentic, like you guys said. Like it felt very real, but there was also a lot of chemistry between them two. Prior to like the Barbie scene when they finally did kiss, I was like, just make out already. Like I totally believed the chemistry between them. I thought it was great.
They have great chemistry. And it should also be mentioned before this podcast is over that a young Christian Bale appears in this movie. Like the sort of like third character in this triad of main characters is Christian Bale. Christian Bale as, this young guy like navigating like his sexuality in London and in the scene, and eventually becomes a reporter who's like tracking down like what's the true story of what happened to our like Bowie figure. Why did he like go out of the spotlight? That's kind of Christian Bale's character. You get to see Christian Bale in some truly terrible makeup. Like with some eyeshadows. So if you're into that, it's fun.
Christian Bale trying to be glam rock, but failing miserably to get his makeup right.
It's a very strange role for him.
Yeah, it is an odd role for him, right? It's certainly not like the, Batman, American Psycho, super macho kind of trajectory that a lot of his films take.
Yeah, even Ford versus Ferrari, he's just kind of this British racing asshole.
Right. He's so subdued in this film, like, because he's very just kind of like this soft, like, shy boy for most of it. And that certainly is not like most of the modern Christian Bale performances that people are familiar with. It doesn't fit any of the categories.
Yeah, he's very emotionless in a lot of his movies, even in like The Big Short, where he's like that investor guy. Like it's all about being like super awkward and like pretty much having no like social tact.
Totally. Also, I think this movie should be celebrated for like everybody in it having a completely normal body type that wasn't transformed like for the film, because Christian Bale just has like whatever, a normal body type. He'd like get super skinny or get super
The
fat.
fattest I've ever seen him as not Dick Cheney.
Is this the part where we start talking about Ewan MacGregor's weight? Because he's like not as skinny as he was in Trainspotting.
Well,
I want to talk about the trailer of this film.
I don't even know if I've seen the trailer of this film, but yeah, let's talk about that.
So just, out of curiosity, I was like, I'm going to watch the trailer before I watch the movie. And it is the worst trailer for this film. It makes it look like Knives Out Glam Rock edition. It's a 2-minute trailer of like, who killed Brian Slade?
It is. I remember because when you guys first, and by you guys, I mean Nicole, proposed that we do this movie, I was like, okay, cool, I'll watch the trailer because I've never seen it. And I got completely the wrong impression of what this movie is going to be. But then I waited so long before I watched the movie that I forgot about the trailer. And Ryan, you're like reminding me that like, yeah, I definitely thought it was going to be like he was assassinated and like who did it and like all of this stuff, like completely not what the movie's about at all. So whoever edited that trailer, whether they were instructed to or not, gave the audience a totally different impression.
That's fantastic. I love that you guys wandered into this thinking that it was some kind of like whodunit mystery movie. That's great. Yeah. That's amazing.
Well, especially when you start out watching the film too, because like, again, Christian Bale's first monologue is like so melodramatic and it's so noir. Like he's like this private investigator instead of a journalist. And then you don't exactly know that he's not shot. And then you have like the Jack Ferry like in the wings, shoots him like Abraham Lincoln moment or whatever. So I didn't know that it wasn't going that way. Like when I first started watching the film either. And then wasn't like until it was like, it's a hoax. And I'm like, oh, this is not where we're going. Okay.
Well, and I mean, essentially from that moment, you kind of lose the whole thread of like, you stop caring about who shot him because you kind of know he's not dead. Mm-hmm. It's a hoax. There's not really any like high stakes around it. And then the movie just kind of like, it unfolds in so many different and more interesting ways that whatever quote unquote mystery there was like does not matter anymore.
Yeah, it's a movie where the mystery at the beginning doesn't matter and the twist at the end doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. Also, this movie time hops a lot. So, a lot of it is set in the 70s, but some of it is set in the 80s as well. So there's definitely an element of confusion that I think this movie inspires. It's the kind of movie that has so much going on, both in terms of like the deep cuts that they use to refer to these musicians in this era and kind of investigating the soundtrack, but also just the story not being linear. Like, I think part of the reason I like this movie so much is because you can watch it a lot, like, and not just for Ewan MacGregor. Lies. Partly, but not completely. But it bears repeat watching, right? Because you don't get it right away, but the more you watch it, the more you discover about it. And those are the best movies, the ones that you can watch a lot.
Well, plus the layers, not just like the narrative, but also like the Oscar Wilde quotes, like the narration, the dialogue's really great. The music is obviously awesome. The costume and like all that, like there's so many complex layers that are all just like really great eye candy and ear candy that, yeah, you can watch it many times and not get tired of it because you can't actually take all of it in the first watching.
You can't. It's overwhelming. It's almost like intentionally overstimulating. So there's just so much going on that you have to kind of like, you have to consider it all in your first watch and be like, what just happened to me? And then you want to go back and watch it again. At least if you're me, that's kind of how this movie became one of my favorites, one of my like back pocket go-tos, because I was really like, I don't even know if I like this. There's so much here.
Well, the first time you blacked out because Ewan MacGregor was naked. And then the second time you thought, maybe I like this movie.
Wow, guys. I feel extremely called out right now.
Again, also, I want to point out to our dedicated listeners that Nicole's handle on this recording is president of the Ewan MacGregor fan club. So don't feel bad for her for us calling her out. She's doing it herself.
Yeah, because you're the president of the Taunt Nicole Club.
I have another music question, but spoiler alerts for anyone who hasn't seen the film yet, go watch the movie because I'm about to spoil the quote-unquote twist at the end.
Spoilers.
Yeah. If the main character is supposed to be David Bowie, and then you have this whole thing where he like suddenly becomes this other character of like Tommy, was this Tommy character based on anyone, or was it just based on David Bowie's transformation throughout his career? Thoughts?
So I have an answer to this.
Mm-hmm.
You guys know I have an answer to this. It does not involve nudity. My answer to this is this: if you consider this film a love letter to glam rock, I think the commentary is that by the time, the early to mid 80s rolled around, David Bowie had effectively killed off his glam rock persona, and he had, signed to whatever it was, Capitol Records, whatever major label he was on in the 80s, kind of moved away from some of the things that made him famous and become this like pop rock superstar. And I think you can also infer from the movie that Todd Haynes is not a great fan of like the culture, like the music culture of the 80s. And, his take on it is that it's kind of soulless. And, against this backdrop of like the Reagan era of, being incredibly anti-gay and incredibly like you have to put all of that stuff from the 70s back in the closet, like that kind of reversal of everything that was free about glam rock. I think that's what they're trying to say is basically like he sold out. So yeah, he's the same person, but he sold out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, that's interesting too, because you think about like all of, you start out as like something is the original, and then it like sort of has this like smaller following, and then it kind of becomes bigger, and then it becomes so big it hits the mainstream and it gets watered down. Mm-hmm. And so like I totally hear like the commentary on like the 80s being a bit soulless, but if you also think about it, in a way it was like watered down to the point where like, you have Billy Idol and you have all these other people who incorporated pieces of that, like not on such an original level and not as much, but it like kind of became so imbued in the 80s too, of like dudes wearing makeup who weren't, like outwardly saying that they're bi or gay, that it's just like, I don't know, it's kind of interesting that you have this like pendulum back and forth. And so you have this like watered down version that is somewhat like referring to the original, but then you also have like people saying that like, it kind of like swung back in the other direction. It's just an interesting thing because it keeps happening over and over.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of Todd Haynes saying like there's a lack of authenticity, that you have like these artists like Billy Idol or like Bowie himself that kind of become like a copy of a copy, and it's not the same rawness that it was previously, nor is it the same kind of honesty about sexuality and about gender identity that you would kind of started back then. Now it's just kind of like, no, stuff it all back in the closet. And there's something very like sad and gray too about how they represent the 80s. Like you go immediately from like this Technicolor glam rock 70s, and as soon as you transition to the 80s, you're like on a train with Christian Bale in some like really bad balloon pants, and everything is like gray and like washed in green, and it's a bummer essentially. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely like there's definitely like a stark contrast that Todd Haynes makes between the two eras. And you don't really even hear like music from the 80s either. You just kind of get these little like snippets or hints of like what might be happening. You see like a woman in a like red leather jacket that looks very Thriller. Like you get a lot of hints like, this is the 80s are just kind of commercial.
Yeah, I wonder like too how much of it was like inspired by like when the actual film was made though, because it was made in the 90s, which feels much more like those scenes. Like you said, like Haynes did like the whole much more muted colors and like the train scenes, those felt very industrial to me. Like it felt like Nine Inch Nails actually would have been like a good like slip in there. And I'm not trying to say just because like ooh, Nine Inch Nails, it just like it felt very like nihilistic and like 90s to me, like those scenes. Again, also because I think Kurt Cobain was like on my brain as well. And so it's like it's just an interesting take on the 80s to me, because to me the 80s are very colorful and the 90s are like that darker, more like monotone industrial, like whatever. So it's just interesting that it's like the film was made in the 90s, and then you're saying it's like a commentary on the 80s, but it's like almost sort of like looking forward to the 90s and a commentary of when he was making the film too, you know?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like that's an interesting kind of wrinkle in it, is that it was made in the 90s, and the 90s kind of had this whole nostalgia for the 70s. So there's definitely something to that. And if you're following along at home and you want to make this podcast a drinking game, Ewan MacGregor has been brought up already. Nine Inch Nails has been brought up now. So,
also David Bowie, because Nicole has not done a single episode not talking about David Bowie.
Drink.
Randall Poster.
Randall Poster has been brought up, so drink. Yeah, make your own game.
We need to release a bingo card on like your social media so people can play along with like bingo for our episodes.
Just scratch it off.
Yeah.
And it's funny because you have all 90s musicians covering 70s songs or making songs to sound like they're from the 70s. Like even some of the original songs, right? You have Grantley Buffalo. And then you have Shudder to Think, who I'd love to talk about.
Yes.
So they have an interesting trajectory as a band. They came up in like the late 80s. They're from like the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. Most known for Discord records with like Fugazi, Minor Threat. Shudder to Think is kind of post-hardcore. Like they don't play Fast and Furious. But they got kind of big in the mid-90s. Kind of mistaken as a grunge band. I think they came out with an album in 1994 called Pony Express Record, which I really like. But since, you know, they played around with time signatures and stuff, and they had, you know, big, thick guitars and stuff, you know, it's a good album, but I think it got a lot of attention because, you know, grunge was on the rise and it kind of fit in there. But they're an interesting band because I saw them in 95 and they were opening for Foo Fighters on their first tour. And you know, so they grew up in the same area as Dave Grohl. So Dave Grohl wanted to bring like friends from like home on tour from the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. And everyone hated Shudder to Think at the show. Like they, you know, they're not a radio band, right? Foo Fighters are very radio friendly. You know, well, one, they're expecting like something to sound like Nirvana. And then two, they're not expecting like this kind of post rock time signature, like weird time signature band that has this lead singer that has like bedazzled face and like there's this weird juxtaposition with their music because he has like this really nice voice. He likes to sing in falsetto. He's got a lot of vibrato in the voice. It's very different from like even the more popular like grunge voices of the time, like Chris Cornell or Eddie Vedder. I feel like those are more, you know, kind of more masculine voices, I guess.
Yeah.
Or a little bit more gritty. And you have this guy with like a really pretty voice. And they kind of embraced it. Like he dressed up in like togas and stuff on stage. You know, he basically invited people to call him, you know, homophobic slurs. Like they like to push people's buttons like that. And I remember enjoying, like it took me like a while. It took me like maybe halfway through their set to like kind of get the music. And then I started to enjoy it. And once I started to enjoy it, I realized like there's like some sort of glam element in it. Which is very deep for like what I was 13 at the time to be like, oh, there's like some glam in this music.
I love that Ryan is casually 13 at this like really transgressive like rock moment Foo Fighters show. Like good for you being 13 and being like way cooler than me, Ryan. I was at a Boys to Men concert when I was 13.
I was at an Incubus concert.
Yeah.
That was the first scene.
Have definitely been to an Incubus concert, but that is a different podcast.
So after 1994, they kind of went in a more glam direction, and they have 2 songs on the soundtrack.
Mhm.
So they have Hot One, which is near the beginning of the film, and that is based off of a lot of Bowie's glam work.
Mhm.
And then they have a song later, The Ballad of Maxwell Demon, and that is once, Bowie has made this transition, or not Bowie, but when Brian Slade has made this transition. So this is a big moment for Shudder to think in their career, because they ended up scoring some movie soundtracks after this.
What scores did they do after this? I'm really curious.
I believe they did High Art.
Hmm.
And then they did an awesome soundtrack that I'd love to talk about sometime, called First Love, Last Rites. Haven't seen the movie, but they basically made a bunch of songs to sound like they're from the 60s, with a bunch of guest musicians on each track. So you have a great Jeff Buckley song, Liz Phair, Billy Corgan, Nina from the Cardigans, Alan and Mimi from Low, John Doe, Robin from Cheap Trick. Like, they all just jump on these songs.
Wow. See, this is why I love this podcast. You get to really shine a light on some very underserved, like forgotten moments, especially in like kind of like 90s music culture. Because I do feel like I don't know as much about Shudder to think as you obviously do, but they are kind of the unsung heroes of this soundtrack, because they have the task of carrying the songs that are supposed to be like the breakthrough Bowie-esque songs. They're the original songs on the soundtrack, right? They're supposed to establish this Brian Slade character as being like the, it person in music at that time. And that's like a hefty task. And these are like, they're fun songs. Like, they're good songs. They're not like throwaways to me.
That's the understatement of the century. You're tasked to write original music that's supposed to represent David Bowie, who's like one of the most universally revered musicians. No big deal.
How many ways could that go wrong? It could go wrong in just thousands of different ways, and somehow they actually make it go right. I think because they're not so referential that they're afraid to do things, but they're also not so adhering to like, I need to make a copy of a David Bowie song that it doesn't sound original and it doesn't sound true. So there's a nice balance that they strike with both Hot One and Ballad of Maxwell Demon that come at these like very climactic points in the film that I think is really nice and really kind of helps kind of string the story together. So they deserve a lot of credit for their work on this soundtrack. If for any reason, like there was ever some kind of like anniversary tour for Velvet Goldmine, all these people were to come together to sing these songs, like Shudder to think, I want to hear your versions of these songs. They're freaking awesome.
Also not true. She just wants there to be a tour so that Ewan MacGregor like takes the stage again, and she will be like front and center on the rail, like crowd pouring onto that stage. Like, security, watch out for Nicole.
I was going to say that, Ewan MacGregor he turned 50 last week, so he might be past his, like, I'm going to take my pants off on stage, like, prime. Like, maybe he doesn't want to do that anymore. But, like, Iggy Pop is still doing it, so maybe it is okay.
Yeah, I mean, he might surprise you. You might be all for it. And also, I have to ask, so to celebrate his 50th birthday, did you show up, like, on his doorstep with a cake?
Popping out of the cake.
Of his fan club?
No, this is actually my birthday card to him. I was going to package it somehow. I'm going to send him this podcast.
Another couple fun facts about the lead singer from Shudder to Think, Craig Wedren. So his career now is just doing film and TV work. And so occasionally he's had to write songs kind of in the style of what he's been asked to do. So in School of Rock, he doesn't write the end song that the kids play. He writes the song that Jack Black's former band performs at the big battle of the bands. Heal Me, I'm Heartsick, which you can totally tell was written in the style of Creed.
Amazing.
So he definitely has a knack for channeling different genres of rock and roll. And it's been cool to see his name pop up in shows like Brooklyn Nine-Nine and like Fresh Off the Boat. Like he seems to have pretty steady gigs making music. So it's really cool to kind of see him transition from, touring rock star to, I don't know, jack of all trades in the film and TV industry.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that pivot. I hope this movie did that for him, at least in part, that it helped like springboard this, whole new career trajectory, because that is super cool. There's also kind of like, speaking of like the 90s, there's also kind of a Britpop undercurrent to this movie, right? I mean, not only with obviously the Radiohead connection, but there's also kind of the Pulp connection. Jarvis Cocker was originally supposed to play Jack Ferry. He was like the first choice for Jack Ferry, which would have been a very interesting thing.
He would need more lines.
Right? I feel like Jarvis Cocker would be completely wrong for it, but also completely entertaining.
I was waiting for Noel Fielding to show up, and then I looked it up, and apparently it was like kind of before his time, before he really like got big. But I was just like so surprised because I didn't actually know when the movie was made. As I was watching it, I didn't know when the beginning of his career was, but I was just like waiting and waiting and waiting for him to show up, because this film is just the embodiment of his life and his career. But he never showed up, and I was just like so disappointed.
Right. Sometimes I wish I could have that conversation with Noel Fielding, who I absolutely live for. I love Noel Fielding. I wish he was in this movie. Then I would probably love this movie too much.
You just like play it on the daily. It's like instead of like having some background music, you have like a background film.
Right?
But yeah, I mean, he could have played any character in this. Like, it's literally like him.
If this film was the noir that Brandice and I were promised in the trailer, then Jarvis Cocker should have been the detective.
Right? Because he's so much more. Yeah, I mean, both like, whatever, in terms of like the way he presents himself musically, but also just like his whole persona is much more that, and not like, I'm this like glam rock, like inscrutable. No, like I don't see him as Jack Ferry at all. So I find that kind of like hilarious and amazing. Courtney Love was supposed to supply music for this soundtrack too.
Oh, so it wasn't just me thinking like the whole time I'm watching Toni Collette as Mandy, I'm like thinking Courtney Love to a degree.
I mean, so I don't know that she was ever up for Toni Collette's like Angie Bowie-esque part, but she was supposed to help with the film soundtrack. But apparently when she started seeing like, whatever playback from the film, and she started realizing that Ewan MacGregor's character looks like Kurt Cobain, she was like out.
Okay, so now I do feel like vindicated. It wasn't just me thinking like this looks like Kurt Cobain.
No,
this feels like Kurt Cobain, even though I know it's not him.
No, I mean literally Courtney Love like somehow wandered on set and thought the same thing, and then didn't want to have anything to do with it anymore. So it is definitely like part of the whole quilt of making Ewan MacGregor's character was definitely like, we're gonna stitch in a little bit of Kurt Cobain. We're gonna dye your hair like blonde and make it really stringy and make you like hang your head. This movie is so like alive with possibility. That's what makes it cool. And I think the more you lock it into like known quantities of like, that's Nirvana, that's David Bowie, like the less fun it is.
Right.
So all those accidental choices, I think, really, really added up to something quite cool and quite special. And the intentional choices of just making like all of these musicians come together to kind of, in essence, like perform their own kind of love letter to glam, right? I mean, somehow they got like all of Placebo to just be in the movie.
Right. And Teenage Fan Club and Donna Matthews from Elastica are covering the New York Dolls. And...
Right. They're just in the movie, like it's just like in situ. So it's not anything forced. Like it all feels very, very organic and very much like a labor of love that a lot of people work together to make happen. Yeah, Placebo, like they're the ones that like tarred up Christian Bale's terrible eyeshadow.
I'm just like thoroughly surprised that this wasn't more ubiquitous than it was. I mean, I know it is a cult classic, but I'm just shocked that it's not like more well known, because it has so much to offer, and I think it's relevant. Like even today, like it's still relevant. Like it's a really, it's a goldmine. No pun intended, but like, I'm shocked that I haven't seen it yet. Or
I remember it was hard to track down.
It was. Yeah.
Yes. I had to download Voodoo to like watch it because it wasn't on anything else. And I was just like, how obscure and ridiculous is this going to be? And it was ridiculous. But definitely not deserving to be that obscure. Like, it should be on Netflix. It should be on Hulu. And I'm like shocked that it's not.
Yeah, it's throughout the years, it's always been really hard to track down. I've had like various like VHS and DVD copies of this film, like since the year 1998, which I know sounds crazy, and it is crazy, but it's true. And it's just always been like notoriously hard to find copies of, to find information about. But it's so fascinating because there are so many threads to pull, especially if you're into any of the subject matter. Like, there's so much to unpack here that, you know, throughout like the early 2000s, wanting to know more about the making of this film and about, you know, all the music that went into it was really hard. And it was like really frustrating, but also kind of cool, and kind of like in that 70s way of like, I can't track down info about this, so I just have to like wildly speculate and watch it again on the DVD that I didn't return to warehouse video.
But did you have it on Laserdisc?
I did not have it on Laserdisc. I wasn't cool enough or like rich enough at that, like, you know, I'm still living at home like age that I had a Laserdisc player. I also like, I was so young when I saw this film that like I was watching it like in my friend's house, like with other friends, like in a TV room, because her parents were more permissive than mine, and I guess just didn't care that we were watching this like completely inappropriate movie for teenagers. Fine.
Just like straight up body oil, full frontal, no big deal.
Right. Which to be fair, it's not like they put that on like, you know, whatever, the DVD case at Warehouse Video. I didn't know that was going to happen.
It wasn't in the trailer, Brandice.
That's true. It wasn't in the trailer. It was not advertised as softcore Ewan MacGregor porn.
Yeah, I told everyone's family that this was just a mystery movie that we were going to watch with Sherlock on the BBC.
It's a whodunit.
It's a whodunit, all right.
And then it turned into a who didn't do it.
Finger guns. It's good.
It was a movie that wasn't particularly well received by the American press when it came out.
Oh, shocking, because, you know, we're so much more prudish than the UK press.
Yeah.
I think
too much.
Cannes loved it.
Who loved it?
In the Cannes Film Festival.
The Cannes.
Yeah, it either won something or it was nominated. It got like a few awards, and Cannes was one of them. And like I said, nominated for Best Costume for the Oscars. So it did get some like circuit nods, but I think it could have been nominated for more. It definitely, like, even acting, like, it was great.
Yeah, it certainly makes sense that it's more of that like 90s art house type of film, and it never really rose above that type of prominence. And I think it's been talked about in certain circles like since it came out. So it's had some longevity, especially given like the caliber of the actors that are in it, because, you know, as of like 2021, Christian Bale and Toni Collette and Eddie Izzard and Ewan MacGregor and Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, like these are all really big names. So it's, and I mean, in addition to the music soundtrack being what it is, like, it's not like there are any lightweights in this. So it's kind of like a fascinating artifact to go back and look at kind of the earlier careers of a lot of these people that are really big now and then have gone on to do a lot of stuff.
And Haynes himself has done pretty well for himself.
Absolutely. Like, he's gone on to win Oscars, right? I mean, he's done Far From Heaven and Carol and like so many movies that have been like more widely received as being like Oscar films, right?
Yeah, you got Cate Blanchett nominated for playing Bob Dylan.
Totally. So he got his moment in the spotlight, but just not for the music movie that, you know, I feel like is maybe kind of in some ways the more interesting one. Like, just because it takes so many crazy risks.
Well, again, creepy whispering children, Barbies making out. Like, what risk did he not take?
What did he not do in this film?
Yeah, Bob Dylan gave him permission to make that movie, so this is definitely the more risky one.
It's definitely the more risky one. There's nothing subdued about this film. It is completely over the top. It's completely weird. It is packed to the gills with amazing music. You cannot go like 60 seconds in this movie without hearing a song that is great and that has energy and that has nostalgia. So it's really got it all. I don't know why more people don't know about it. I feel like it, again, should have like just more screenings. Like, let's get more people to know about Velvet Goldmine. That's obviously my personal mission. So if anybody wants to form that fan club, get me in. You and me.
3 years ago, Nicole went to Ryan and she's like, I think you should do a podcast about soundtracks. And that was the day she planted the seed for this huge diabolical plan to make Velvet Goldmine resurface in pop culture.
There's so few people that know that it even exists. So it's a weird boutique thing to talk about in like any podcast, even one that's strictly about soundtracks. Like it was definitely not what I expected. So thank you for letting me come here and talk about this.
You mentioned this in the Life Aquatic episode, like, if you ever want to do Velvet Goldmine, I'm here.
And look at us now.
But it's definitely a soundtrack that I kind of thought about when I started this podcast. Like, I love these soundtracks where a band forms just in service of the soundtrack and they never play live or do anything outside of the soundtrack.
Right. Like, come on. Like, I want to see the Venus and Furs live.
Like, how the hell does that happen?
How does it even happen? Like, how did all of the chips fall into place to make this soundtrack even possible? Like, I don't know. It's beyond me. And it's another one of those soundtracks that it was never really widely available in any format. So, I mean, now that we have streaming, obviously, like there's more accessibility, but it's always just been kind of like just out of reach and therefore like always very cool to me and always very interesting. And I've always wanted to unpack like, come on. Like, I want to see like the full Venus and Furs show, Tom. You have nothing better to do.
Yeah, I like how Todd Haynes and Randall Poster were like, hey, this supergroup thing is cool. Let's do it again, and I'm not there.
Yeah.
And then Randall Poster was like, yeah, and I'm going to do it again in Life Aquatic, except without a band. It's just going to be So George doing David Bowie songs in Portuguese.
It's just such cool choices, like unexpected and perfectly right for the films that they're in. Like all these choices just feel right. There really isn't, no pun intended, a wrong note for me on this soundtrack. I think everything works for its moment. And it's all super integrated, which you also can't say about very many soundtracks. Like a lot of stuff just kind of ends up like, we had to make a soundtrack, so it's like it gets dumped there, right? But these are all like very crucial to moments in the movie, to parts of the story. Like their Satellite of Love by Lou Reed being used when like Brian Slade and Kurt Wylde are finding this like attraction to each other, and they go on like this carnival ride and it's like playing and they're singing it to each other. It's like so ridiculous and over the top, but so good. Just works.
It almost feels like the music came first and the movie came after to support, but obviously that's like not the case. It's that well integrated. It would have been really interesting to be a fly on the wall in the conversations of talking about who and how and trying to get those musicians on board to be this like super group, and then be a fly on the wall when they're like agreeing to like work with each other and create this like super group.
Mm-hmm.
Would be very interesting.
Yeah, that's the song that my friend introduced me to the Velvet Goldmine soundtrack with. He's like, oh, Venus and Furs is actually Radiohead. You got to hear their Roxy Music cover of 2HB. And HB stands for Humphrey Bogart.
It's so great. This friend is amazing. Shake that friend's hand for me next time you're allowed to shake a friend's hand.
He's the one that does the intro and outro music for the show.
Ah, love him. Love it. That's great. I just love that anybody introduced you to this at all, and especially like in that particular way.
Well, I mean, I knew about it. I just didn't know anyone that had it because I was like, oh, it's got those Shudder to Think songs.
From when I was 13.
It all connects to Shudder to think. Well, thank you guys for coming back and for talking Velvet Goldmine,
AKA Ewan MacGregor.
aka Full Frontal with Ewan MacGregor.
AKA the best movie with Full Frontal that you've never seen. So watch it.
Yeah, Todd Haynes is an interesting director. He was almost like my cabaret of directors, where it's like I know so much about his soundtracks, but maybe I will never see any of his films. But for you, Nicole, I decided to watch this one.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your sacrifice in the name of soundtracks that Nicole wants to talk about. It is appreciated and noted, and I will return the favor for whatever we do next time.
High Fidelity.
I'm sure you've seen High Fidelity.
I have seen many times.
I have also seen it. For once.
Check out Soundtrack Your Life on Instagram at SoundtrackCast. Subscribe to the podcast, whatever platform you use. Leave us a review. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for joining us this week on Soundtrack Your Life. Make sure to visit our website, soundtrackyourlife.net, where you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too.